Okay, now it's time for part 2 of our project on value for painting 1. And what we need to do is use this wet on wet blending technique that we just practiced in this blended value bar, where the paint colors transition slowly into each other. We need to use that to begin to make our chiaroscuro sphere look illusionistic. Remembering that the chiaroscuro sphere, at this point we have mapped out the values. We have this kind of drawing of where the value patterns need to be. And you can see in this illustration I have included kind of a number guide where your value bar, if white is 1 and burnt umber is 6, how these values get kind of distributed. You know, your highlight would be 1, the area of light is 2, the area of shadow 3, core shadow is a 5, and then the area of reflected light is 4. So it's a darker middle tone. It's here. It's not a light tone at all. And then the cast shadow is the dark tone. So the core shadow is a 5 dark tone, maybe a 5-6, and then the cast shadow, you know, is dark. That's light being blocked out. So that's a little map of kind of considering where your different values will go. But it's also important to remember that your values will be blended together by the end of this to create the illusion. So even though we start out with that kind of hard line of where the core shadow is, as we proceed with the image, we're working on blending between the areas to get the illusion of 3 dimensions to work successfully. Another thing to note, with the number guide that was given, you know, this area of reflected light is a number 4. It's a darker middle tone, but there's kind of an optical illusion when it's put between a 5 and a 6. It tends to make it appear lighter in examples like this, but please remember that that's actually a darker middle tone when we're painting. So we have kind of a guide here that you can consider as you are applying values, and I'm going to run through it really quickly. The thing that's happening at this point is we're taking these basic vocabulary ideas with relationship to value of highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow, these 6 stages of value. We've kind of given them physical form by doing the value bars in our painting, and mixing our complete palette of 6 stages of value. Now we're trying to apply those 6 stages of value, that kind of map of how light might fall across a sphere, and combine it with the technique of wet on wet blending to create a really interesting, simple, and sometimes quick to produce illusion. So where I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to switch over with the value bars. I was using flat brushes that have the kind of square top. I'm going to switch over to these round brushes for the sphere, because a lot of times we're having to reach into little corners and things, and so I feel like these shapes work a little better for the sphere. I'm going to start in the highlight here and just put some white down. Again, we're using wet on wet. That's why we paint white onto the white canvas, right? We need some paint that's active and ready to move. And I'm just trying to get enough down here that I can blend this highlight out into the area of light as needed. So get enough paint down here. I don't want a massive puddle of paint or anything, but I want enough that we can do some blending. Again, wet on wet blending involves 3 brushes. So we have 1 brush dedicated to white. 1 brush will be dedicated to the lighter middle tone. I should have saved. Actually, I'm just going to use one of these because there's so much area to cover. I'm going to use a larger brush, and I really don't have to get into any corners on this one. So I'm going to use a flat for this area of light. Now, this is sticking my fingers in the paint. This is a large area, and so we're using a lot of paint for this. And as I begin, they're kind of focus in the area around the highlight, so that you know, when I get down here, I'm going to have to blend the area of light with the area of shadow, and I want that paint to be active. So I'm going to hold just for a second before putting all that paint down, so that I know it'll be nice and wet when I'm working in that area. Okay, so at this point, I got a brush dedicated to each value, and now my job is to get a blending brush where I can work between the two areas and try to get them to blend together. And this can be a challenging area, and oftentimes this notion of having 3 brushes is really important, because I'm going to have to kind of fight the to reassert the highlight into this, because the middle tone kind of is pretty dominant, kind of overtakes the highlight a lot of times. So I have to kind of reassert and kind of go back and forth with the blending process here. The other thing not to be ignored is that you have a terrific paintbrush tool in your finger that can do some really subtle blending as well. And in fact, it's kind of historical note that Rembrandt really kind of was a very adamant finger painter, and would do his some of his subtle blending with his finger as well. I want to get a little bit of paint on here, and I kind of want to flatten this out. It's getting a little textured. So the only area of absolute white in this whole painting is going to be the highlight. So we're trying to get it to blend out fairly subtly and stand in contrast to the area of light that is around it. And for some reason, this does always seem to be one of the more challenging moments in the painting for me, but I don't mind taking part in a demonstration that shows that, you know, you just kind of have to keep after it and do your best to get the result, the blending that is going to make your illusion work out best. So kind of working back a little bit, and we're not far off here. I'm going to move on for the sake of the demo. At this point, got to get some more light, work all the way out around to the edges here, and even begin to think about my next transition, which is going to be with the area of shadow. I'm getting worried about my palette. I'm going to give it a quick spritz, and without leaving a little bit of standing water droplets on your palette, it does help extend kind of the paint. I mean, it keeps it from drying out, but it also adds a little bit of moisture to your paint. Sometimes helps it go onto the canvas a little better. Okay. So I'm painting right up to the line where shadow will begin. I do want to leave enough paint there that the blending, oh, not that much. See how there's a little stand of paint there? That is too much. So I'm going to try to blend that out a little bit. But I want to leave some paint around for the blending to have some moist paint to kind of fade out into. So I got a brush dedicated to the light middle tone. Now, again, I'm using these round brushes that you can kind of be made into a point when they're wet, because I'm going to have to get into a little point there for the shadow. And so that's from our number code that we put. That's going to be our number 3, where we start to get our transition to the core shadow. So here I'm going to put down a little bit just to unload the brush, and then I got to get my shadow, a little thin little start of it up there, and then let it get a little wider as it goes towards the middle. This is a more delicate version of blending, doing the wet on wet blending, than the value bars, because things are they're rounded. You know, we could just use parallel brush strokes, and we had a little less kind of difficulty in terms of these smaller areas and things, but this is how we learn the technique. If I do go outside the edges of the sphere, we're gonna be painting in a background, and that will give us an opportunity to go back and clean up the edges of the sphere if we need to. So kind of painting in this area of shadow. A little messy right there, went outside the edge, and I'm trying to get thinner up there, maybe I could have chosen a smaller brush, but we got the area of shadow roughed in for the most part. Everything is still wet. If it takes you a long time to get this in, there is the option that sometimes a distant misting can be a good way to work right here. Now we have our blending brush, and let's see if we can get this to blend as we go. This is going to be a little bit more tricky. So we got 2 areas of wet paint, and we're just going to start trying to use this blending brush to kind of pull them together and make the transition from light to shadow, this kind of imperceptible change. You know, no lines. There should not be a line remaining. And sometimes the values will, the dark value might move too high, or the light value might move too low. And with the 3 brush technique, we'll go back in and kind of reassert things that need to be kind of corrected if we're losing an area. Well, you can see here we're just, again, staying pretty consistent with kind of parallel brush strokes. I'm keeping all my marks going kind of in the same direction, and just trying to get the blending to occur. It looks to me like the area of light is kind of, you know, moving pretty low, and I might want to reassert, get a little bit of my shadow tone and try to kind of reassert some of it. I don't want it to just totally disappear. So I got my brush dedicated to that tone here, and just kind of pushing back against all the light that kind of came down into that area to try to make sure I'm not just going to lose my area of shadow completely. But the lighter tones have more white, they're more opaque, and they're oftentimes a little bit stronger in terms of their impact. Continue to try to reassert the shadow just a bit. Sometimes the longer soft stroke will help get rid of the kind of look of the little dabbed lines or whatever we have there. And again, I'm going to reassert just a little bit more of the shadow tone and try to push it up a little bit, because we want there to be this area of shadow, because it's kind of the bridge between the core shadow and the area of light. And if we just had a core shadow and then an area of light, that would be abrupt and harder to make it kind of believably softly blending. So that's getting there, kind of. I want to blend that back with my blending brush just a little bit, but it is kind of a slow and concentrated process of trying to get things kind of just right. And if you have a perfectionist streak, it will be brought out by this. And good luck. Either this process for me can be meditative or frustrating, or has periods of both. Whoop, that was not the thing to do there. Okay, so the transitions look pretty good. For the sake of time, I better move on. And yeah, this can drive me into a kind of continual battle for perfection. But we're getting transitions at this point. Now I got to take my lighter middle tone brush, and I'm going to grab a smaller, maybe a couple smaller rounds at this point. I need a smaller brush to try to get into that area of core shadow, which again is going to be a number 5 value. So it's not the darkest tone, but almost. And the smaller brush is going to allow me to kind of feed the darker tone up there where it needs to be. And start to, I need a good amount of this paint down here, because like I said, the lighter middle tones are much stronger value. I mean, just the opacity of the white, this having not that much white in it, it has more transparency, and the more transparent paints tend to get overpowered by the more opaque pigments and paints. So sometimes a reminder, if we're trying to get our brush, we're trying to get a pointed element of our brush, it's a good idea to kind of get it in the paint and kind of roll it to get that sharp tip like that, because that's what we need to get into the smaller areas. Kind of load it with paint and roll it a little bit. Sometimes I'll leave it loaded. I can see a hair. It's trying to come off of there. So I kind of want to get rid of that hair so I can get my sharp point here. And if I got my brush really sharpened up by rolling it, then I can get into the more detailed areas a little better. Okay. So I need to move quickly, or else my paints are going to dry, and then you have to repaint the entire area that is dry, and I don't really want to do that. So, core shadow. There it is, essentially. I got some areas where maybe I have too much paint, but we'll just see what happens. So, I got a brush dedicated to the darkest tone, and then I'm going to use a smaller, not a flat, but a round, for blending this time. I guess I'll just use this one. Not real small, but small enough. It's cleaned out, kind of. Damp, but not wet. And I'm going to just kind of check it and then use it to try to blend some of these really tight moments. Hopefully you can see this pretty well. I'm gonna try to blend some of these transitions between these two very subtly. Keeping the brush, again, moving parallel to the line, and getting these two colors mixing together as best I can. And this is why we do the 3-brush technique, because we have to reassert some values sometimes. I think it is important to know I'm keeping the brush with this technique fairly almost parallel to the canvas to try to, so the bristles aren't grabbing, they're just kind of dragging across. So it's almost like flat against the canvas, this the way that I'm painting here, to try to have a real gentle impact on the paint surface and not kind of grab any paint. I'm just trying to kind of smudge between the two and not. You can see the darker tone is kind of traveling up. I think I had quite a bit of paint down there, and so that is happening. And what I'll wind up doing is trying to take my shadow tone and kind of push it back down just a little bit. I'm going to give it the overall canvas the slightest of mist, and then get another blending brush, even a smaller blending brush. This had blue in it before, obviously, but no active paint in it right now. It's just moist, and I'm going to see if I can use this smaller brush to just kind of work some of the paint together gently. And get that transition somewhat. Again, keeping the brush fairly parallel to the canvas, not pointed down at all. Just kind of pulling around some of this paint to get it to kind of fade out. And let's see, just move that over slightly. See if we can get a little better transition at this point. Empty it, brush out, wash it out real fast, bring it back just moist, not wet, and then see if I can feel my paint just experience over time. I can feel the texture, the way it's moving around right now. It would love to be dry. It's trying to head in that direction. I push the dark down a little bit. I'm going to go back in with my other blending brush, slightly larger. Try to push things back up. And you can see it's a fairly delicate little process here. And we also have to kind of remember, keep in mind that we want to keep the roundness of these value patterns. Sometimes I'll see projects where they start to get flattened out, they start to look like stripes across a flat circle. We've got to keep these rounded. So they get up. See, I added some water there to prevent what I thought was happening, the area drying. And I think we've done pretty good here to retain the area of shadow. It's pushing the area of light up a little bit, so I'm actually going to grab, we call it a 3-brush technique, but I'm going to grab a little bit of the light tone and start to try to just reassert that roundness where the light was getting pushed up. So wet on wet blending requires you to be kind of, I don't know, sometimes it feels frantic in terms of trying to do things before the paint dries, but the further you go along, the more you kind of get a sense of the way this stuff works, when it's agreeable or not agreeable. So we got a good transition at that point, and we'll work on putting in the value for our area of reflected light down here, which is number 4. And so it's not a extremely dark middle tone, but one of the in the dark range. So let's see. Sometimes I'll start painting in the wider area and try to roll my brush as I go to give me a sharper tip. And then when you know, I got a good amount of paint down, then I will, you know, my brush is not quite so loaded, I can go up to the little points where I need to have a little more detail. Grab a little more. Way too much. If I get a lot of paint down there, then sometimes I'll just kind of unload my brush, and I'll use my brush to kind of move around a large amount of paint that I may have put down. Okay. I'm actually going to put down just a tad of the color for the core shadow, because it almost appears to have been obliterated in relation to this. So then when we start blending, oh, I've ruined all my blending on the top at this point. But reasserting the core shadow just kind of sometimes is necessary if the blending process has kind of made it disappear to a degree. So at this point we have several different values down here, and as we did previously, I'm just going to try to work at blending these guys together. So again, I'll try to get over here for a little more close-up view of what's happening. Thing is a little tricky, but it's something that you can get a handle on. Just, it's a trial and error endeavor. So here, trying to blend these two areas together slightly. If I break the edge like that, it's okay, because I'm going to paint into the background later, and I'll use that as a time to try to fix it. Now, I kind of reasserted a line of this core shadow when I put down some more of the tone. So I'm actually going to try to obliterate that line into the surrounding gradations at this point. I'm off the, sorry. So, you know, kind of made a line happen. So I just said, and I just need to kind of pull that out into the other areas of the painting. Light pressure with the brush, just kind of trying to get that paint to dance around and mingle with the paint, the other paint that's already there. We do want a defined kind of area of core shadow. you know, that number 5, that darker middle tone. But we also want blending between that area and the paint around it. Subtle blending, moving out off there. So as long as these areas around it are wet, we're still able to do wet on wet blending, and that sometimes involves trying to reassert one of the colors nearby, and just take a little bit of a shadow tone. Oh shoot, too much water. If you get a drop of water on there, that is bad, and you need to get it off and try to use a rag, paper towel, because it will make all your paint. Oh shoot. All right, I'm just demonstrating the process here and the occasional mistake. Let's see. Get a light tone here again and get rid of that mistake. It is paint, so mistakes can be fixed. Got my shadow tone here. Remember, I want to keep the roundness that kind of defines everything. I want to keep that roundness. I don't want to let that get obliterated through the process of blending, and so sometimes I'm going to have to reassert different values to make sure my shape isn't getting completely lost. See the whole thing. Maybe a little bit of reflection on the darker tones. The other thing about the dark tones really that should be recognized is that they do get darker as they dry. They dry slightly darker than they look when they're wet. So I'm taking my brush here, trying to blend back into the transition here, and I think we've got it pretty good at this point. But you do want that wasn't what we wanted. Okay, so we're still rounded, and our sphere may be upside down, but we really, a lot of times I will be moving the painting around so I can get a better angle, but at this point you can see we're getting our gradation pretty good. I might even, just to make sure that the area of reflected light appears, I have it as a number 4, but it seems to have gotten a little dark. I may try to reassert and lighten it up just a smidge. While the paint is still active, I may go in and just give it a little, just lighten it up just a hair. Okay, so we got our value patterns in the sphere, and then the area below is the cast shadow, and we'll give it the darkest tone. I actually wind up usually mixing together for this, sometimes mixing together the 5 and 6, just to get that tiny bit of white that's in the number 5 to make it just a little more opaque. So I mix 5 and 6 together sometimes, at least for this first little part. Now right here, I have my brush fairly well loaded. I'm going to do that thing I was mentioning where I kind of roll it to make a point come into being, and because I want a point to get right up there. Put it on the palette, roll it just a tad, and then come up here and kind of start to assert this bottom edge of the sphere and the edge of the shadow there. Let's see. when we were painting the hard edge flat shapes earlier in the class, and in this bottom value bar, that notion kind of pulling a bead of paint to make a nice crisp line. Really important here, you don't want any of the white of the canvas to appear, because it would ruin the value relationships. There's a big white line in between the sphere and the shadow. That would be counter to the behavior of light that we're trying to mimic here. Whoop. Shoot. So, a messy moment there. And I'm just going to go back and push that line down. Okay. This brush is a little clunky right now for some reason. A little clunky, and just got to make sure I control myself and the brush and get these value shapes correct. Putting down a good amount of paint here. I don't want to have any stands of paint, so I need to go back and smooth this stuff out if I'm getting a large stand of paint there. But getting this shape right is significant. Remember, this cast shadow is an ellipse, so it doesn't have any flat moments. It rounds the entire time, and sometimes it's good to paint outside the edges. That way we kind of drew outside the edges as we were working on this. You know, it might be worth painting the whole ellipse, you know, this part right here, just to figure out the if we've got the shape correct. Sorry I'm rotating the painting so much, but I think it is not a bad idea as you're trying to figure out ways to move the paint around and make things happen that you want to happen. Sometimes if you can get a different orientation to it, that can help you out. Okay, so now we got the sphere and the cast shadow in, and then the last thing we're going to do to kind of clean it up is paint in the background, and that will be the final video. I thank you for your attention, and good luck practicing this technique, wet on wet blending, and getting your sphere accurate, and we will deal with the background in the next video.